In this final video, we will work with variables. First, we'll declare a variable that is the last date available in our table data stores, so that the previous tables and graphs always display the last 6 days of available data. We'll create filters to select the period we want to study and filter by specific cities. We will do this using the form component. We'll set up filters with default values, and the graph will adjust accordingly. We'll also code a button below the graph that links to another page with detailed information on the selected dates and cities. When we click the button, the variable will appear to the other page, right here in the URL, and we will call also this page. Let's dive into variables in SQL Page. SQL Page variables work just like SQL variables. Instead of displaying data statically since July 1st, as we did in the previous examples, we'll ensure graphs and tables always show the last 6 days. I will start by declaring the dateMax variable at the beginning of the script, representing the last date in our table data store. And then we can update all the queries accordingly with this date. DateMax is declared, and within all the row level parameters, so basically the queries that feed our chart and table components, we can use this dateMax. So dateMax minus 6 days and dateMax. Same here. Same here for the nice table that we have, where we use dateMax rather than hard-coded values. Please note that in SQL Page, you access the value of a variable using a $sign. So when we declare the variable dateMax, to access this value, it's with the $sign before the variable name. Let's refresh the page to see if the tables and graph display the last 6 days of data. Now, let's create the filters for our data using the form component. We call the form component. We add a top level parameters, which will be the name, title, which will be filters. We will add a button that we click to validate the filter called validate filter. And we will set the method as get. This allows to pass the form contents directly as URL parameters. We will see what it means in a few seconds. Now that we call the form component and added some top level parameters, let's add row level parameters, which will be the fields of the component form. I'm starting with 2, which will be the start and end date. So I just pasted this code, which is 1 and 2 row level parameters. One row level parameter will be the date start selected variable. The other one will be the date end selected variable with default value date as type. Let's refresh the page. Here it is. The last row level parameter that I want to add to filter my data is the cities. So I'm adding a third row level parameter, which will be another field of the component form, which will take the cities as values, and the name of the variable will be cities. The brackets means that it's a list. The default value is New York, as shown here, and we can select the cities here. Side note, I manually entered the values for 4 cities But if you had a data set with hundreds of cities, you could use a JSON function like this to automatically display all available cities in your dataset. It basically creates the list of all cities available. I'll keep it as a comment to show how it's done. So we initially had the 4 cities I manually wrote down. If I now refresh the page, I've got all the cities of my dataset using this function. Now have our 3 filters: start date, with the variable name being date start selected, end date, with the variable name being date end selected, and cities. Let's call the chart component to demonstrate how to use this variable. I call the chart component, I give it a title, which will display the first date and the end date of the analysis with the usual top level parameters. Let's now add row level parameters to our chart. The row level parameters is the data, and we see that the date selected will depend of the values inside the form. So I'm calling date start selected, date end selected, and cities. Let's see what it gives us. We have something that works, but it can be enhanced. For instance, I want default values in the form so that the graph is displayed by default before any values are entered. Also, when I refresh the page or click the Validate Filter button, I want the values I entered and that show in the URL, for instance here where I selected Los Angeles and Chicago, to be still displayed in the form and not replaced by the initial value, which was New York, which is confusing because here we have Chicago and Los Angeles, but it's New York right here. Final nice to have is not starting from the top of the page every time I filter my data and I click the validate filter. To do so, let's add variables that take the values I entered, or if no values are entered yet, take a default value. We will declare 3 new variables using set and add them as row level parameters in the form to ensure we have default value. Just above the form, I'm going to declare the 3 new variables. The first variable I'm declaring is the cities variable, which will take the value cities entered in the form, and if no values are entered, it will be these 4 values by default. I'm going to do the same thing with the start date and the end date, where if a date is manually written here, it will take this value. Otherwise, it will be the date max minus 10 days for the start date and the date max by default for the end date. Let's now use these values inside the form. I am going to replace this default value by date start selected with a dollar because it's a variable. Same thing here with the date end. Rather than having this weird write down a city placeholder, I'm going to change it with the variable cities so that it will display all the cities selected. Let's save the file and refresh the page. So now what we want to check that when I change the values here and select some cities, the graphs update, but the values remain inside the form. Let's see if it works. The variable of the form appear here. We did select Chicago and Louisville. We did select July 1st and July 4th. The graph displays accordingly, and the values remained within the form. The last thing nice to have is not to start every time from the top of the page when I click the validate filter. In order to do so, I'm going to give an ID, which is a top level parameter of the component form. And whenever I click the validate filter button, which is an action, I will start from the page index.sql, this page, but at the form component. Let's see if it works. When we clicked the validate filter, we remained on this part of the page. We've just created a form with get variables, default values, and a chart that can be filtered accordingly. To explore further how we can use variables, let's create another page with a simple table focused on the cities and date selected in the form. First, I am going to create a button below the graph with a link to a new page in our app called cities.sql that will carry the parameters from the form. Below the graph, I create the button component. Then I am adding two row level parameters for this button. The first one will be the link. Where should we go when we click this button? I'm going to use the SQL page.link function that allows to redirect when I click the button to a specific page, which will be the cities.sql page with these URL parameters. And I'm going to give a title to the button. Here is the button. We didn't code the page yet, so let's do it. The first thing I'm going to do with this page is to put a shell. I'm going to use the exact same shell as for the index.sql. And I'm going to call the table component. I'm going to make it sortable. I'm going to use a query that was written by GenAI to simply display main information regarding the cities and dates that I selected in the previous form. So you can see that I'm using the date start selected variable, the date end selected variables, and the cities variable that was declared in the form in the previous page. So now going back to the index.sql. Let's say I want to display 3 days of data and only for Dallas. When I'm going to click the deep dive on the above values, the variables will be passed to this new page, the dates and the cities. So that's why it's only 3 days being displayed, only for the city Dallas. If I now select Chicago and Los Angeles, and let's say 2 days of data. I'm getting the data for Chicago and Los Angeles on these specific 2 days. The last thing I want to do is have a button that I can click to go back to the previous page while keeping the values of the variables they are now. So that would mean only the cities Chicago and Los Angeles for these specific dates. So I'm going to add a button right above the table. The URL parameters will be still cities, date start selected, and date end selected. And when I click this button, I will come back to the form with these values within the form. Here's the button coming straight back to the form with these values in it. One last example. We selected Los Angeles and San Diego between these dates. We covered a lot of topics in this tutorial, but I think you now have all the weapons to use SQL Page for whatever project you may have. Good luck!